I checked. Yeah. Slides.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to start the DNS operations meeting in a minute or two. So come on in and sit down or flee the scene as you like. Wow, that got quiet in a hurry.
Yeah. Oh, listen to this. So, it's not a needle, but
So, good afternoon, evening, everyone. This is the DNS Operations Working Group, and chairs are Benno, Tim Wasinski, and myself. Our area director is Warren Kumari. I'm not sure if Warren's here or not. If he is, he should wave. There he is, down front. And our minute taker is Paul Hoffman. Thanks again, Paul, for doing that. This is the IETF Note Well. Since it's only Monday, you might not have seen it yet this week. By the end of the week, you probably will have, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't read it. Please read it. Please bring any questions to us or the ISG. And these principles and items are really important, so please do read them. So we also need to point out the IETF Code of Conduct, RFC 7154. That is even shorter and more important than the Note Well. Well, they're all important. We were cautioned to say they're all important, and they are. But the Code of Conduct is pretty short and intended to be pretty comprehensible. And please be aware, we take this very seriously. If you feel the code has been violated, please reach out to the chairs or to the IETF Ombuds team. And quoting from a absent friend, we work as individuals. Let's remember to be nice to each other. The usual IETF meeting tips for in-person participants: sign into the session using the MeetEcho on-site tool from the data tracker agenda. If you don't sign into the meeting, not only won't we know you were here, but they won't give us the right size room next time.
like this one. Yeah.
Remote participants, you don't get to enjoy this enormous room we're in, but please make sure your audio and video are off unless you're chairing or presenting during the session. And for remote participants, use of a headset is strongly recommended. So next up is some material about the agenda and our current update. So Tim.
Cool, thank you.
Slides.
Yep, you guys have slide control, so that's fine. Yep, I hope you can hear me. So welcome all. It is a huge room, man. That's massive. So we've got some updates of current work. Benno did some hackathon updates. So they hear what's going on. Couple drafts of current working business and a few for consideration documents today. Some biz documents, mostly for our agenda. So let's move on to the next slide. We were kind of hashing these out. So today, Siobhan's going to talk about domain verification techniques. I've been sort of banging on the authors to move things along, and we've been making good progress. We have a few things still to sort of sort out. And so he's got some updates, and it's actually really coming into shape. So some good reviews from the other directorates. And then Wes is going to talk about the 8624 updates. Speaking with Mr. Housley and Mr. Crocker about their algorithm lifestyle stuff. And that's going to be pretty good. So that was some good discussion about that. So that's great. So that's today. And then also today, on the next slide, what are we doing on the next slide? Oh, yes. The 3901 biz, the IPv6 stuff. Tobias and we'll be presenting that. I look forward to it, actually seeing if we can, the working group wants to work on that. And then Donald and Mark have two updates to some current RFCs, T-Key and SIG0. So Don's got some slides, so we'll talk about those and see if there's interest in updating those. I think there should be. And then on the next slide, oh yes, the 7050 deprecation. So some good DNS 6.4 stuff. So this will be always a good time. It's, you know, so thanks, Nick, for being willing to present this. And then what do we have next? Oh yes, other meeting of notes. We kind of look at what's going on around the IETF to make sure. So Peter is working. He's got another side meeting on the post-quantum DNSSEC research for Thursday. So there's the info. You should all sort of check that out. And then we'll do some document updates and our good chairs vibes. Always important. Zone version is now 9660. So that's happened since the last meeting. That was good. Thank you to all the authors for making that happen. So we appreciate that. And then next. Oh yeah, we have 3 documents in the editor queue. So we've really kind of spent the last couple months since the last IETF working through all these, and they've been sitting there. So Paul did a good job of sort of wrapping up the 2 biz documents, and then the working group, we thank all the implementers on the feedback to avoid fragmentation. And that's actually, so hopefully those will be moving forward into RFC land. They're all in the editor queue. So good work. And then we have 1 working group last call. Is that the next slide? Yep. Structured DNS error is in working group last call. I've seen some good comments on the mailing list, but I believe we do need more to sort of speak about that, to move that forward. That would be great. And so, yeah, so there's been some good stuff on that. So thank you for that. And we'll run that through the end of the week, I believe. And then for another one that's ready for, we think is ready for working group last call, Peter's DNSOP generalized notify. He put this together. We believe based on that, and if he's at the mic, he can sort of just yell at the mic line. We think they've covered all the bases, and we don't think there's any open issues, and we believe the draft is done. Peter, go ahead.
Hi. Hello.
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, so at the last ITF, a bunch of points were noted, but they were mostly minor. So we've addressed those. So for example, you can use the new notify mechanism not only for sending a hint to the parent when you have a key rollover, you can also do that to send a hint for DNSSEC bootstrapping. In fact, it's the same hint. The parent will know whether it's bootstrapping or rollover because it knows whether you have DNSSEC. We also removed some stuff that's not needed with alternative approaches and otherwise just polishing. And so we actually don't know what else to do with this document except for observing that it seems to be done. Yeah, so please bring any other comments to the table that you might have, and otherwise we'd like to suggest to advance it.
Yeah, we agree. And so we'll want to once we wrap up structured DNS error, we'll be looking at what to do next and sort of keep things moving. So thank you, Peter. And now also other things. there's two documents that we think are getting close to working group last call. Just hold on a second, Wes. The DNSSEC automation, now that they've got another author and they've sort of brought it back to life, we want to review that. They really kind of view that's ready to go. And the CDNS consistency one, where the chairs, when I say we, it's like we're probably going to reread some of these and just make sure we've not missed anything in sort of the discussion. So that's good. Now, and then on the next slide, on today's agenda, these two documents are pretty close in both ways. So vein verification techniques, we've got two, I think maybe three open issues based on sort of Ben's sector review that are sort of getting wrapped up. And there's some author back and forth on some things, but it's getting pretty close. But the next one is Wes's and Warren's 8624 biz that you'll be hearing about today. I think that's definitely, with especially all the feedback recently, that's definitely ready to go as well. So if we go to the next slide, then with 8624 biz, we have the two must not documents that will go with it. All three we plan on sort of moving together. I've reviewed both those must not documents, and I believe they've sort of addressed everything on my side, and so they don't really have much other than that, and they're pretty straightforward. So that's cool. So if we go to the next slide, what else do we have going on? Oh yes, we're not sure. We're kind of, these are two that we adopted, and they're relevant or dependent on DELEG or vice versa. And maybe we've got the wrong vibe there, and so the working group should sort of speak out on that. The SEC being Dane one, being the first one, that would be good to know, because we've been discussing with Ben about working group last call and sort of holding off. The other one, the NS revalidation, now that we've got Willem as an author, it's a really relevant discussion in there about the motivations, about the parent-child signaling stuff that I think, I know I made one of the, I made a few people go and read that because there's a couple of good sections in there that I think really do sort of tie into some of the big discussions going on with DELEG about the signaling stuff. Would like to hear some feedback from the working group on that. That would be good. Awesome. So if we go to the next one, oh yes. Paul brought up a thing about some expired documents in the data tracker that I knew were expired, but I didn't realize we could just mark them dead and they would go away. It's like, so we sent out a note. We got DNSSEC automation brought back up, and then the rest we kind of didn't. And so we've marked them as dead. They can still come back to life if there's interest, and if people want to, reach out to us and we'll talk it all through, sort of thing. So now they don't show up in the data tracker, Paul. So I think that's what will make us all happy. So thanks. So the next slide. Oh yeah, we adopted the Greeks, and I know they've done some stuff during the hackathon. Benno's gonna it's probably on the slide. So I saw some email about that. So it's good to get stuff going on. It's the only thing new adopted. And the next, what do we have on the agenda? Oh yes. So other documents of interest. Thursday in DNSSD, the multi-queue types, Ray's little thing is getting ready for working group last call. They're going to talk about it, but the chairs are pretty positive, and they're going to send a note out to DNSOP when they do put it in working group last call to make sure that there's enough folks sort of looking at it. And I do think that people are looking at it from the DNS side. So that's a good thing. And then the authors, Mr. Crocker, Mr. Housley, reached out about their algorithm lifestyle document. Now that they've sort of worked out their issues with Wes and Warren, and we all have issues with Wes and Warren. It seems like it's a much cleaner, simpler thing. And they've asked about if we're willing to adopt it. And we'd love to hear some thoughts on that. We'll send out a note about that and see where people sort of feel. So we all have opinions. So thanks, guys. And so we had a lot of stuff come in at the last minute, and there's several things that sort of missing the agenda that we sort of dropped even from Thursday's discussion. And we sent out the note, and we tried to balance it. Current group work always goes first. And then we sort of took the biz documents as being, oh, that's kind of relevant. And then we did some juggling on the rest of those. So I want to list these and sort of have people sort of give you an idea. So Johan has two documents, the key state document and the delegation management. Of course, Johan, you sent the slides like 5 minutes before the meeting, so I can't slide them into the deck, but we've uploaded them to the data tracker. So one thing that sort of kept showing up in our minds was we think the ISC was discussed with these because they describe a process and the process is good and people are using it, but I don't think DNSOP can add a bunch of value, but we're not sure. So, and we're willing to hold an interim if folks want to sort of discuss that. That seems like a pretty useful idea, sort of thing. So if we go to the next slide, what else? Oh yeah, Tommy and Jen's document on the client authentication recommendations for encrypted DNS. I, in a spirit of being sort of reaching out and stuff, we offered them a slot to speak only if, but they would be the first to get bumped because UTA is really not meeting in 121. They've added Joe Abley as an author, and I've been sort of following the work, and as someone who works at a place that has a giant Active Directory implementation going on in inside networks, it's kind of crazy. It's useful stuff in there. So they put some slides together for folks. So you should really pay attention because it's touching a bunch of the world that people unfortunately have to deal with. So it seems pretty good. And if we crawl into the next slide, what else is? Oh yes, the explicit forged answer signal use document about it describes how a resolver can be explicit that it's giving a fake answer, and kind of the reasons why. And they put together like a 2-page summary, like here, and see if there's interest in DNSOP and sort of discussing this. But definitely, we haven't seen a lot of working group discussion on that. So it's just sort of let's see what's going on there. We can do it, yeah. So thanks for that. And then on the next slide, okay, yes. So we've been using the GitHub issue tracker to sort of keep tabs on who's doing what and which of the chairs are sort of touching stuff and what's going on there. And so that's and also making it more transparent to folks to take a look at that. So give a shot, if you take a look. And then the next one sort of is, I think, our current status on things, where things are sitting. If we go to the next one. Yeah. So we sort of see where things are going, sort of thing. So anyway, if you folks want to see what's going on, like what are you up to, that's a good way for folks to see it. So there you go. It's been sort of helpful for that. And that's kind of like how to sort of keep track on what we're doing outside the data tracker. And so we've been making good progress, and I think we can sort of push some more documents out, so at least get stuff through working group last call. So we appreciate all that hard work. So thanks all. And now is going to be Siobhan, and we can sort of hash out some of the domain verification technique stuff. I believe that's what it is. Oh no, it's the hackathon updates. Sorry, Benno, it's you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Apologize all.
No problem, no problem. So
We miss you, Tim.
yeah,
I know, I miss you too. You blame my employer.
And so there we go. At the very last moment, I asked the different hackathon participants to stand up and to fill in. So sorry to put you on the spot. So this weekend was the IETF hackathon and the DNS group. They had a combined presentation. I like to go through the slides and ask 5 sentences, a minute at most, some additional comments on the slide, if you like. And you can use the microphone in the room because it takes some time to get on the stage anyways. So, Philip in the room, are you ready to fill in? So, thank you.
Well, basically, there is a very old experimental IRC, I think it's now 8 years old, called Chain Query Request, and it's basically meant to speed up DNS validation on a forwarder, because then you can request all of the DNSSEC related stuff directly from a recursive resolver. It seems that nobody implemented it so far, so it seems like a nice hackathon project to look at that. So I started working on that. One goal is to implement it. The other one is that we're working on a DNS library in Rust, and it's supposed to be flexible. So it was a good test, like, is it actually easy to add this stuff? So the result is I hacked something in the server part that it generate these replies. Then I hacked something in a client part such that it can use these replies to validate, and it works.
Thanks for the update. Next is the greasing from Schumann and Stefan.
So, as you know, we have a problem of falsification with the DNS. It can be hard to deploy new features because of all the bad middle box and so on and so forth. So the idea is to do the same as in TLS on Quick, to grease, to exercise things that have not been used, such as new EDNS options, new EDNS flags, etc. So it was implemented during the hackathon in an authoritative name server in the bind resolver by Mark Andrews working remotely. And of course, unlike TLS, where it's acceptable to stop if there is a problem with greasing, with DNS, it's more difficult. So we have still the general problem with greasing. Is it acceptable to break or not? And also, there have been issues about how to interpret existing RFC. For instance, during the EDNS negotiation, there is a discussion on the DNSOP mailing list about that. So the good thing about greasing is that it forces you to read all RFC and to see that it's not specified as people thought it is.
Okay, thank you. And Andre.
Hi, Andre, I see. So what I did, I like used some private type to implement a DLEC as an on the authoritative side. It basically behaves like a DS record, so it shows up along with the delegation. That was quite fast. Then I got into trying to do also the resolver part, and then I found that even the authoritative part was not complete because it worked when signed and it didn't work when signed. But it's just like I didn't spend a lot of time of that, and it's from my perspective, it's very easy to implement the DLEC type, the new RR type on the server side. That's what I did.
Thanks. And we have Johan.
Yes. This is actually a sort of multi-year effort here. We started a long time ago in the multi-signer project, and we had some issues, and that sort of led to the generalized notifications that you all know about, which led to the delegation synchronization with DNS updates that you've heard about. And that's also sort of done. So now we're circling back to the multi-signer problems, and multi-signer is becoming distributed, which is what we worked on during the hackathon. So now it's about having different signers in a multi-signer configuration, finding each other and establishing communication with each other, etc.
Thank you very much. And last is the implementation of MTL mode in DNS resolvers. Joe?
All right, thank you. So
I copied only 4 slides, so it's very compressed. Sorry.
yeah, that's fine. So we basically implemented a DNSSEC version of MTL mode for a post-quantum secure DNSSEC. And we were able to get it implemented in NSD and Unbound and get the handshake working and validate the signatures and sign the zone so we could demonstrate that it works for post-quantum signatures.
Okay, thank you. And Joe and Swapnil were working on that, and you might wonder, where was Willem? Well, Willem was also contributing in the train. On his way back from RIPE meeting, he was hacking in the train and contributing to the project. That's it. Okay, then we'd like to invite Schumann or Shivan, who will give the presentation for the... Shivan, excellent. This is, yeah, this works fine. Yeah, the clicker. Let's double check. There we go. You're welcome. Maybe that one is more convenient. Maybe.
Never let software people near hardware.
Hey all, I'm Siobhan, and I'll be talking about domain control validation with DNS, which is a draft we've been working on for a while. I also have my co-authors, Shumon, Paul, and Eric in the room, so we can all answer your questions together. Yeah, so we're on version number 6. It's an adopted draft and getting along. We made a bunch of changes since 05. We use owner name instead of domain name when we need to. Thanks to Dwayne for pointing that out. And we also have some text to clarify the handling of mismatching records in the RR set. So we have some more specific guidance as to what to do when that happens. We also clarify how to handle string boundaries in the text records. We say that you should concatenate them just so there's less ambiguity. I guess the next one's probably the most the interesting one. We also say now that owner names of CNAMEs, the label must always start with an underscore. And this is to bring the draft more in compliance with existing CAB forum guidance. And DigiCert actually had a report early this year about how they had to revoke some stuff because there was actually a lack of guidance about this. So we're hoping, I think it also kind of shows that this draft, why we need this draft. But I think we've had some back and forth about this particular point and this text. So I would like for us to just kind of solidify this. And so if you have objections to this, please speak now. And yeah, I also went through the security considerations section based on Ben Kaduk's review and tried to point out specific attacks and threats so it's more clear. Yeah, so I think there is still some cleaning up to do with the security section, and just make sure that we responded to the early sector review, which I think is looking pretty doable. Ben Schwartz had a proposal to add a specific section on the purpose of the DCB. There was some conversation on the list. I personally feel like it's pretty clear at this point in the draft what you're supposed to be doing this for. I mean, there's we can always add more text to clarify, but I think if you add more text, then the overall document kind of just becomes harder to read. So I don't know. I personally don't feel very convinced that we need this section, but I'm happy to hear comments about this. And if my co-authors disagree, they can also say so. And yeah, I think we're getting pretty close to a working group last call. And there was some interest to do a different draft, not this draft. If there's interest in like NSDCV for DNS zones, but very much out of scope for this draft. I wanted to keep most of this time of my slot for questions and comments, so we can make some progress IRL. So yeah, if anyone has questions or concerns, please come forth.
Okay, so Ben, please go ahead.
Hi. So Ben Schwartz, Meta. My feeling about this very broadly is that I think that probably this technique is used in a lot of places where it's not the right approach. That is, I think, at the root of my concern here. Because if you think about it, domain control validation is really kind of a weird thing to want. Like, prove to me that you, the owner of this account within my system, have the ability to mutate this DNS name out in the world. it's a very unusual primitive, and it makes sense in certain contexts. But most of the time, I think what people actually want is something that says, hey, domain name out there in the world, is this account on my system authorized to act on your behalf? And DCV is being used to achieve that, but it's pretty awkward for that because those semantics are different. And so when we define a new machine, like we're doing here, it should be very clear what this machine is for. The draft actually already, without any changes, has a lot of text on this. And I think the text is quite good, but it's sort of buried in the security considerations section. And so, the simplest thing from my perspective would be to take, I think, section 5.7 from the security considerations and elevate that into like the introduction, or, basically upfront, like, what is this thing and what is it for? When can you, reasonably use it or not use it? The text is mostly there.
Thanks, Ben. I'm actually not opposed to elevation at all. That sounds pretty reasonable. If it helps clarify. We had that initial discussion quite a bit, the stuff you pointed out about, is this a point in time validation, or, does the existence of this record kind of say something, just long term? And we were like very clear to have that text in section 5.7 saying, no, this is very much a point in time check for, proving that you control this domain. So I think moving that, kind of fundamental conversation to a top level point or a top level section, that sounds fine to me. I don't know if Shuman and others, what they feel about this, but expect that to be, I think I see Shuman coming up.
Yeah, I was trying to join the queue, sorry. No, I agree. So Ben, I answered some of your comments on the email thread, which you saw. Trying to clarify. So we didn't want to tackle, we have examples of how individual applications do authorization based on the results of a domain control validation, but we didn't want to, those were just examples. That was the thrust of the document. The thrust of the document is how to properly do domain control validation. But you're right. I mean, tackling the whole universe of applications doing authentication is not feasible for single documents. But if we can categorize certain types of applications and why that's appropriate, then I think we would be willing to look at that. Maybe we can recruit you to help us classify applications. But there are some clear security problems if you do domain control validation and you subsequently rely on that as an indicator that you permanently control a domain, right? Because that's certificate issuance would be a horrible example for that, right? And there's many other examples. But in certain types of applications with different threat models, maybe it's okay. We don't know. I mean, that depends on analyzing the security properties of those individual applications, which is not a task we took up in this document.
Yeah, obviously there's some limit to how far you want to go with this, but I do think, we're defining a tool with some really sharp edges here. A tool that looks like it's good for a wide range of things and is actually only good for some of those things and is kind of bad for some other things. And so I just think the document should be very clear about, and provide some good guidance to somebody who's considering using this tool. Like, is this really the right choice for me, or should I be taking some very different approach?
Yep. Okay, yeah, sounds good. So I think your suggestion about elevating some of the security considerations would help people make decisions about that. The other thing I think, if a lot of the document has grown very long in my opinion right now. So if you come and read it, it's kind of confusing, right? Because a lot of this stuff has grown by accretion, and maybe some of the things when I look at could be organized in a slightly better way. So I think the authors had a discussion about that earlier this week, and we're planning to do a read through to make sure it makes sense for anyone new to the document. And I think some of the improvement in organization and the rationale will come out of that, hopefully.
I mean, I think the reason we started this work in the first place is kind of exactly because of this, because we were working on a project where we removed a record, and then suddenly the service was like, hey, I guess you don't want this anymore. And that was obviously not like what we interpreted the existence of that record as. So I feel like, yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense to just have that be very front and center, or that section 5.7 be very front and center.
Right, and the other thing I want to note, I think you may have mentioned this before, Siobhan, is that one of the good outcomes of working on this document is that we had closer interactions with ACME, and we made them improve some of the ways they do things, like account-specific challenges and differentiating whether they are authorizing a domain versus a single host name versus a wildcard, right? So all of that, ACME has taken from recommendations that we've produced. They're not in the CAB forum yet. That has to be balloted and improved. But I think we've made some good things happen in adjacent areas.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else in the queue. Wes? As a presenter, I guess, not for the questions. Okay, excellent. So if there are no other questions, thank you. Sorry. If there are no other questions, thank you, Siobhan. And I think we're close to finishing the document and going for the working group last call.
Yep. Thank you all for bearing with
Excellent.
us.
Thank you for the discussion. Up next is Wes.
Good Monday, everybody. IETF Mondays are much better than other Mondays, right? So today I wanted to talk about the future of DNSSEC cryptographic recommendations, which is the title of the slide, but it's really draft IETF DNSOP RFC 8624 biz. And as a reminder, this is not really a biz. This is sort of a complete replacement. And it's written by myself and Warren Kamari, who's sitting down there. Next slide. And just as a reminder of,
There is a clicker.
thank you. So as a reminder of what the goal of this document was, right now, 8624 is what defines what algorithms you should use. It's sort of the recommended list of, hey, you should use this one. We have all this list of 15, 16, or whatever the number is available. Here are the ones you might consider using today. And updating that list is hard. And we add new rows to the IANA table all the time, but we don't really have a way of adding new recommendations. So the goal of our document was to add those recommendations to the IANA table directly so we could manipulate them without having to publish an RFC that does all of them. So previously, we had added 3 new columns, and the only reason that I brought this up today is I wanted to, we thought we were about done, and it was wisely discussed in the past 3 months that, you know what, the existing recommendations really only talked about implementation. And there are 2 aspects of algorithms. There are, whether or not implementers should be, putting it in their code and offering it for use. And then there's columns now for whether or not you should actually be using these algorithms regardless of whether or not an implementation has it. You can imagine the case where implementation should support it, longer than it might be, in heavy use. So there are 2 tables. There's the domain security algorithm numbers table and the digest algorithms table. And they both have, one's about signing and validation and the other one's about delegation. So now we have 6 new columns instead of 3. That's changed since the last time I was on a slightly different stage talking about this. The goal for today is we still think we're basically ready for last call. Next slide. So we've made a couple of changes, including, I still have the clicker. It is Monday. Did I mention that?
I think you want to have this one, or not? Sorry.
Yes. I will remember I have the clicker, maybe. So in the last, I think, month or so, there's been a good discussion brought up by Paul Hoffman in particular that if you're going to say you must use these 2 algorithms, it's how do you use 2 of them? I mean, technically you can in most cases, but we don't really want to say that. We really want to say, here are the best recommended algorithms that we have available today. You should pick the one that's the most appropriate. So currently in our previous document, it said must in the table, And we changed that based on the discussion on the mailing list to recommended. So then it makes more sense. And we also added text at the bottom that was supplied by Paul as well, saying basically what recommended means and that you should pick values based on your local policy. One other discussion that has come up both in a lot of verbal conversations and a lot of side conversations, and as well as on the mailing list, is Steve Crocker and Russ Housley have proposed a draft called DNSSEC Algorithms Life Cycle. And the purpose of this draft is to really explain how an algorithm transitions from brand new into implemented into active use. And they have, I believe, 7 phases in their document. And there was a discussion about should these documents be combined. And our answer was no, because we wanted to find sort of the building blocks for how policy algorithms could actually be implemented. And if you look at the existing values, which we didn't want to change in the existing RFC, they actually don't map to the current phasing documents, because the phasing document is sort of the new approach, and we wanted to be able to support multiple phasing algorithms if needed. So in our belief, I considered our table values to be sort of the assembly language. And yes, you can add table values that make no sense, like you must not implement and you must use, and you know, it's recommended for use. Hopefully nobody tries to make a proposal to do that. So that being said, we believe, again, that the documents are basically ready for working group last call. There are actually 3. I've only talked about 1 because the other 2, one of which is must not SHA-1 and one of which is must not GOST, hasn't received any comments, and they seem to be sort of stable. Again, if there is discussion that we want to have on a face-to-face basis, now is the time. We have a few minutes. DKG. Yes. I'm sorry, you're calling the queue.
No, perfect.
This is Daniel Kahn-Gilmore. I recognize that must on 2 different algorithms is a little confusing, but I don't think that the way to solve that is to change it from must to recommended.
Is it bad?
Sorry?
Is it a bad thing to do?
If I'm an administrator, I don't want to make these decisions. Someone please tell me what I should do. If you come here and you get, we've got it, we're going to tell you what to do, what you should do is pick one of these, you haven't done that job.
So I will answer that by saying, I will repeat what I said a minute ago, that we are not making up the values. We are transcribing the values from the existing RFC and making a framework so that the working group can make new drafts, write one, that maybe we want to change it so that the table only has 1 recommended value at the moment, but it doesn't. If you go read 86, I never remember numbers, there's actually 2 musts in it right now, essentially, for implementation. So,
and you don't think that you want to do that at all in this draft? You don't want this draft to be the change?
The original goal was no, because we didn't want to get into the long-term discussion of what are all the right values. Half the point of this is so that we could actually think about things on a smaller basis, rather than try and get the working group to agree on a complete reformat of the table, which is what we had to do previously. Okay. So write the draft. The good news is if you read the must not documents, they're really short. All you have to do is say, I want to change this value.
I love must not documents.
Glad to hear it. But they do have to go hand in hand. We have to do all 3 or none. So any other comments? Oh, yep, Jim.
Thanks, Wes. Jim Reed speaking for myself. I'm kind of confused. You've got in this new draft, you're talking about use for DNSSEC validation and implement for DNSSEC validation. What's the distinction and why is it there?
The distinction is, and I think we put in text to describe it, but the distinction is if I am bind or not or unbound, that's implementing it. If I am an operator of Hardigers.net, which is mine, then I might deploy and use it as a operator.
Okay, thanks.
Tommy?
So it was brought up in the chat and I feel the same way. Why the implementers need the guidance of what they need to provide to deployers, the admin specifically, so that the admin, like we could give that separately, right? Implementers recommended support both of these so that admins under given guidance can choose one or the other and then give recommendations that way. But what I don't want is any edit to this document to say implementers shall only are only required to implement this one cipher, because then a customer needs something else, and then what? We have to be, please don't do that.
So I think probably everybody in the room agrees with what you just said, where the implementation requirements should support all the algorithms that we think are wise to potentially use, but we might even boil it down to, as DKG alluded, only one that we actually recommend for use, but people could pick other ones. But then I personally, speaking with no hats, including the no author hat, would always expect that we would have multiple things that are even a must for implement for exactly your reason. So, Mike
St. John's. I always get a little bit annoyed with these documents because we talk about DNS signing and DS verification, and what we really mean is what you should implement on the publication side and what you implement on the consumer side, or the client side, if you will. So have you considered thinking about it in those terms instead of, I look at this and I'm not really quite sure what a client's supposed to implement sometimes.
That's a fair point, and I would suggest reading the document. I think that we put in wording that did talk about publications. I vaguely remembers that's went into the previous version. I don't have all the wording in my head, but we would absolutely accept text suggestions to improve the document if you want to send them. So that's what last call is for, right? Anybody else? I think we're good. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, up next. Tobias, you're up. Yeah, 1.5. I will update the timer. Yeah, thank you.
That's a brittle mic.
15. Yeah.
Okay, welcome everybody. This draft initially pushed by Momoka, and you might see I look a little bit different than Momoka, is about RFC 3901, so the IPv6 transport guidelines for DNS. Short recap, 3901 tells us every recursive name server should be either IPv4 only or dual stack, and every DNS zone should be served by at least one IPv4 reachable authoritative name server. Well, this has some problems. So this document is from 2004, and if you like it or not, nowadays we do have IPv6. With more IPv6 mostly, IPv6 only networks, we basically run into a situation where we might have as much IPv6 islands as we were afraid of having, IPv4 islands as we were afraid of having IPv6 islands in 2004. Also, these recommendations kind of tend to trickle down the stack. So if you look at the ICANN recommendations for TLD authoritatives, they kind of sound the same. If you then look at like your favorite national registrar, they most likely look a bit like the ICANN ones. So what this draft does is to actually make those two things dual stack. So to prevent namespace fragmentation due to AFI, address family islands, we want to have dual stack recursors and dual stack authoritative. And of course, for authoritatives, the two should be consistent. Over the past roughly year, there were several comments and suggestions from the mailing list which were integrated. There, of course, are some problems, but what we most certainly do not want to do is we do not want to prefer IPv6 over IPv4. it's about making them both equal citizens. So use both, not prefer v6. There, of course, is a little bit of a problem with IPv6 in DNS because it's kind of slow. Well, maybe. So there is a paper we just had at IMC, which is that routing can actually have an impact on the RTTUC towards a specific, in this case, root server authoritative, especially when those are anycasted, and especially when you are in a very specific topological configuration and might use specific upstreams, which are very affordable for v6, and you have something different for v4 or the other way around. Similarly, if you have a misconfigured setup for IPv6, you might have to wait for a recursor to fall back to actually, well, get the answer they are looking for. However, I would argue that there are also solutions, and the solution here is that you should start running stuff and figure out what breaks and then fix what's broken. There is also the history of IPv6 and path MTU discovery and fragmentation, which is a story full of misunderstandings. And there are a lot of ways of holding IPv6 wrong. There's, again, a couple of solutions. One is the ongoing IETF draft on avoiding fragmentation on UDP transport. Again, we can start doing things like in practice and see what breaks and then fix things. And we can, of course, also do TCP, which is kind of another thing. So we have DOU, DOTCP, DOT, DOQ, which would be quick, DOH, DOHQ. My favorite one, DO carrier pigeon. And I heard that there is a certain BOF outside involving some seagulls claiming that they also want to have their own transport protocol. In addition, we have happy eyeballs. They are pretty insistent, even more than when it's about your breakfast. Happy Eyeballs does have some opinions about address family selection. The Happy Eyeballs version 3 draft also has some about transport selection. And DNS tends to have the idea that Happy Eyeballs should not have so many ideas, especially when it comes to DNS. Because often those Happy Eyeballs approaches do not really work for DNS that well, or they lead for a doubling in query load, which also doesn't really work that well for authoritatives. So, how can we fix it? So we could also add some transport or address family selection preference to the document. So we basically gonna do our own Happy Eyeballs without fragmentation and browsers. Or we could expand the BCP. Well, expand the BCP. Thing is, resolvers are kind of different than authoritative NS. I heard that some people even implemented different daemons for them. Transport tends to be a bit different from networking, so the selection rules might differ. And in general, small batches tend to be better, so easier to maintain than all X basket solutions. And there's also additional things which kind of somewhat belong into the same basket because they're ultimately a little bit about transport, like the avoiding fragmentation draft. Well, we basically have two options now, and this is what I would really like to see some activity on the mic on, which is keeping things as they are and update 3901, making it bigger and bigger, or take a more comprehensive approach. So we do have some comprehensive approach at home, which might look like this. So we could have an IDE that does guidance on IP AFI support and selection for authoritatives, one that does the same thing for recursives and stub resolvers, and then also have the same split of documents, so one for transport protocol support and selection for authoritatives and one for recursors, and then add in also the avoid fragmentation document and possibly also more. Little problem if we want this, and I kind of like the idea. It would be kind of cool if there would be more people than, well, Momoka and me, writing IDs, because this is actually a lot of work. I think we could cover the first two by splitting the current draft, but 3, 4, well, 5 is already done, but 3 and 4 definitely would need additional authors. So I will spare you the actual singing. In summary, BCP 91 needs some dusting. There are problems with IPv6 and DNS, but we will not get rid of them by just avoiding any form of change. Our draft in by now version 6 moves in that general direction in a kind of just update the RFC way. We could also get out the bigger bat and hit problems beyond address families, so transport selection, which leaves us with two options. Adopting the draft and start with updating 3901. And yes, this is an explicit call for adoption. Well, it's an explicit call for adoption. It's confusing. Anyway, or we split the whole thing into smaller documents, fill BCP 91 with a couple of more atomic documents, which we can then also more atomically update. For example, if we would want to have different considerations for recursives and authoritatives, which might make sense. If you like this option, as do I, ask yourself, which part could I contribute? And that's the end of my slide deck, and I'm actually looking forward to hear what the mic has to say.
Thank you. Wes?
I'm Jeff Houston. So channeling Jeff Houston, I'm Wes Hardiker actually, but I have two different perspectives. And the thing that you said that I think worries people is we should try it and fix detect what's broken and then fix it. Jeff's whole point that he's made a lot in many places is that with V6, you can't detect it at the server side. So it becomes very hard to figure out what's broken because you at the server deploying V6 don't know whether or not what you're deploying is broken. So I'm going to take off my Jeff hat now and put on my architecture hat. This is a bigger problem than even just the DNS, right? We need some form of mechanism to signal, hey, the response didn't come back from generic protocol, whether it's DNS or whatever. So there's two solutions. We can, what Jeff has said is we really need to fix V6, period. Now, there may be hacks we can put into the DNS to enable some sort of signaling. Possibly even looking at deleg for, by the way, my average response size is this. If you don't think you can handle that without fragmentation on the path, then you're not going to get an answer. I don't know. But it's hard to see this solution of just pushing V6 go forward without a corresponding how are we going to be even able to detect the problems that you yourself mentioned and figure out how to fix. So I agree with the goal. Absolutely, we need to fix this. We need to get V6 to standard deployment to DNS servers. And I will say that nobody has written the corresponding document yet that V6 doesn't work. We need to remove it from the root servers, right? Nobody's done the opposite. It's like we're just stuck in this middle place that we need to get out of.
You're trying to make me cry, aren't you?
So Eric Vink, no specific hat on this one. So I would love to adopt the document, by the way. A couple of suggestions though. At some point of time, I still wonder why you don't want to make some round robin between V4 and V6, for instance, or do you leave completely to the recursive server itself? Anyway, there are two should. You say some point of time in the recursive resolver, you should be dual stack. I'm pretty sure there are some deployments that are V4 only or V6 only, where this should does not apply. So you may want to be a little bit more explicit about when you cannot follow the should. Else you will get some discuss from my friend at the ISG, right, typically. But anyway, and the other part, again, the text about the IANA consideration points to a web page which is only about the IANA managed zones. And I wonder whether it's applicable in this document. And that's all. But again, I'm in favor of this document.
Tommy Jensen, Microsoft. I'm strongly in favor of this or a similar flavor being adopted. Whether it's split into separate documents as you list out on the previous slide, or whether there's one document that has sections, to me is semantic. If you need assistance, per your question, if you need assistance with fragment 4 for recursives and stubs, I am volunteering to suffer with you. I'm going to be a little provocative and suggest that we do need to take a firm stance. And if the answer really is that we need to work with deleg, that's fine, as long as you don't make us revisit the requirements draft because we're desperately trying to last call that. But consuming that to signal information, sure, fine. But let's get out of the place that Wes was describing and Yes, thank you for bringing this.
Eric?
Eric Nagranakamai. I'm also very firmly in support of adopting this. I think it's really important work for us to do. There are a lot of, a large fraction of the large authorities out there have V6 on them already, and we're starting to see deployments of resolvers that want to be V6 only. So having some better, I don't think there's going back. I think there are problems to fix, but going and documenting the problems we need to fix and working on fixing them is desperately needed. I think on the broader topic of how we structure it, I think it may be that for the transport related topics, we may want to wait until DELEG's further along and look at how do we solve those as part of DELEG and really keep the focus of this on the IPv6 related topics and kind of defer the transport issues until later.
Ben Schwartz, Meta. Yeah, +1 to Eric. Let's just wait on transport until we have DELEG on the complicated transports or novel transports, but and keep this focused on IP family.
Yeah. We definitely need to update the existing recommendations. Tim and I started a draft a while back as well. Just for some information, Bind already has things like dual stack servers, where a recursive server can specify a dual stack server to actually resolve across islands. So you don't actually have to keep, it works both ways. So if you're v4 only, you specify these servers and they will do your resolution for you on behalf of you, and the vice versa. NAMD already has a v6 bias in it. So we really do, in terms of IPv6, we want to be able to see when the traffic has moved across from v4 to v6. So you can look at v4 connections. So still having a bias towards IPv6 is useful. NAMD measures the times to all the servers, but then has about, I think it's a 50 millisecond bias towards IPv6 when choosing the next server. So it's not just using it one, but trying to keep a bit of balance. And we added to the IPv6 stacks usemin MTU 2 decades ago, so that nobody had to do fragmentation in the network, and the servers, DNS servers, didn't have to worry about it. At that stage, they could just turn that on an IPv6 socket and have everything transit the network without doing path MTU discovery. That was put there in 99 because it was clear, came up in 99 because it was clear that moving the fragmentation to the end host, we'd need it for DNS. I just don't know why we've never managed to actually write it down in an RFC to say to do this. Okay, but yeah, we should definitely be moving the recommendations forward. It's been way too long.
Thanks.
Paul Hoffman. I'm not sure this is the right working group for this, even though there's a lot of interest in it here. I'm not, and I'm saying that really as I'm not sure. It seems like the problems are more V6 problems than DNS problems, but we're seeing them in the DNS. We probably see them differently than other working groups. So I'm not saying please take this over there because I don't have an over there. And I think there is a lot of interest. I'm just wondering if we're going to spend more time learning V6 stuff or bumbling through than not. Having said that, I put up my hand before I heard Mark. And if there is a lot of V6 understanding, especially among the developers and such, that might be good enough. I just don't know if the rest of the working group is going to be able to help much.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you all for the comments. Yeah, thank you, Tobias. And we will take the feedback with us and discuss this also with the authors of the draft. And again, maybe we do some liaison with IPv6 and some other people here in the room. I know they're IPv6 experts. Make sure there's sufficient expertise within either DNSOP during this presentation or other place.
Yeah, it's perfectly okay if we decide it's not for us, but we should take a look at it. Thanks.
Oh. Next, next, apologies. Tisik from Donald Eastlake.
Hi there. I'm Donald Eastlake, unaffiliated, and I'm going to have to move along pretty quickly through these slides due to time limitations, but hopefully that'll be okay. As I think many people are aware, there's sort of two different sides of DNSSEC. There's the one that provides data authentication and authenticated denial of existence, which we're been mostly focusing on, I think. And then there's DNS transaction security, which has to do with authenticating requests or transactions. And that's what this presentation is about. So just historically, the SIG and key resources were originally used for both of these. DNSSEC, the data security changed over, but SIG and key are still used in connection with transaction security. So T6 stands for transaction signature. The latest version is RFC 8945. It's a meta RR, provides a way to efficiently authenticate a request or a transaction, which is a concatenation of the request and the response, using a keyed hash algorithm and a shared secret key. So right now it provides, there's nothing about any way to set up these keys or the algorithms to use with the keys other than by configuration. T-key, transaction key, which is the latest version of which is RFC 2930, pretty early, does provide such a mechanism. So 2930, you send the T-key RR in the additional information section of a query for type T-key. You get back a response with that T-key RR in the answer section. It has a mode field. There's several modes. Server assigned. The idea was the server decides what the key is and sends it to the resolver. Debbie-Hellman exchange, DSS API, and a resolver assigned where the resolver sends off the key. And there's a key deletion mode in case one side wants to tell the other that it's no longer keeping track of a particular key. These keys are soft state, so you can always just toss them and they can be renegotiated if you need them. This GSS API mode is just a way to tunnel these tokens through. I don't really know that much about it or how widely used it is. It's documented in a separate RFC and its own authentication and encryption. So, but all the other modes, you need to authenticate the message because otherwise somebody in the middle could fake keys and stuff like that. The keys have names. The name is really associated with the key and an algorithm. And they need to be at least unique at both the resolver and server. The way this sort of stuff normally works, keys have validity periods. And there are some problems. One is that the so-called Diffie-Hellman exchange keying mode, which is not necessarily the best name. It uses the well-known functions XOR for mixing bits together and MD5 for hashing. perhaps not the best modern choice. Although TSIG was carefully designed for multi-hop, TKey doesn't have any explicit provisions for that. Not saying it necessarily needs them, but it doesn't have them. So there currently is an RFC 2930 BIS, it's a personal draft. So it deprecates the MD5 XOR version, and it adds a new exchange mode called ECDH exchange keying, which basically uses SHA-256 and HKDF. It seems a lot better. Adds a little ping mode for sort of just tasting the basic plumbing and finding out what the other side thinks the time is, because you need some time synchronization, and reserves the mode for documentation. So this is just an example of how the mode would work. You send a query, it has this T key with a name and algorithm, et cetera, in the additional information section. And also you send an elliptic key there, and the whole thing is authenticated with either a secret key TSIG or a public key SIG0. And the server sends a response back, similarly authenticated, which contains in it a lot of the fields are repeated back, but it has the validity period that the server is going to really believe that key, free for the key, and a server elliptic key, and then you go through the usual calculations to do elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman and derive output keying material. So moving on a bit to SIG0, that's RFC 2931, reuses the SIG RR, but with a type covered at 0. So it can be used to sign requests and transactions, but it uses public key logic, and whoever is trying to authenticate that signature better have the private key. And you can use it to authenticate requests and responses generally, or you can use it to do things like authenticate an update with a key which is associated with the zone to be updated, or whatever other authority that request is asking to have. And their public keys are stored generally in the DNS using the key resource record. So SIG0 is not designed for this purpose. There's lots of fields unused. It doesn't have any error field. Both TSIG and TKey have a way to send back extended error field information. There's also no originator ID. In order to validate the signature, the ID field is covered by that, so you need to have the original ID to do that. Now, Bind gets it to work, but Binds does this for multi-hop SIG0 by forwarding with TCP and by using the same ID and maintaining a separate ID space for that TCP connection. Has a little more limited algorithm field, and it's not extensible. Both TSIG and TKey have an other data field, not currently used, but it could be used to extend them. There's no way to extend SIG similarly. So there is a 2931 BIS, hasn't done much. Yes, it's removed the statement that TCP support is optional. It's changed some implementation requirements a little bit just to decrease the variability of SIG0s to make implementation a little easier. There is a section on supporting forwarding, but forwarding is currently kind of a kludge, and it does update the draft, of course, to the RFC. It's essentially into a new draft with the current formats. So what I'd like to be able to do is think about some questions about these things, and interested in hearing responses on the list or here. One is, should SIG0 really be replaced by a new thing? You might call it PKTSIG, public key transaction signature, that was really better designed for forwarding and extensibility and has an error field and so on and so forth. Should it be convenient for TKey to be used multi-hop? And if so, does that really require any changes? Should the TKey resolver assigned and server assigned modes, which as far as I know haven't been implemented, be deprecated? Those are the only modes that actually require encryption. All the other modes are all done with message authentication codes or public-private signatures or the like. And currently, these documents say that you can have either a TSIG or you can have a SIG0, but you can't have both, and you can only have one of the one you have. But there's no really obvious strong reason for that. The way you add these is you just sign or MAC the packet without it, and then you add it. Well, you could do that, and then you could do that and add several, or even a mixture of TSIGs and SIG0s if it was useful in some case. So these are the questions that have occurred to me. There may be others if people can have a chance to take a look at these drafts and think about the problem.
Thank you. I see Peter in the queue.
Yeah, we do have a couple minutes for questions, so if you have a feeling, come on.
Peter Pacek, SC. I wonder whether there is any use case for Tiki except for GSS TSIG, because that's the only use I've ever seen. We've removed the support for the Diffie-Hellman exchange from bind, recent bind versions. No one ever complained. So I wonder, do we need to resurrect it, or maybe we can limit it just to the GSS TSIG and be done with it? I mean, what's the use case for the ECDH? Do you have specific use case in mind, or did anyone requested it, or is it just because we can? Or
It's a little hard to hear you. Are you saying has anybody requested ECDH TSIG?
Yes, that's one of the questions. Yes.
I believe so. Yes, that was actually specifically suggested by Mark Andrews, and.
Well, that doesn't count. I mean, was it requested by anyone who will use it? Not, I mean, we can implement anything we want because we like writing code, but has any user requested ECDH?
Well,
ECDH
if somebody is using, there's no way to do what it does right now. So I don't think there's anybody using it. It could be people using the older one that uses MD5 and XOR. It's deprecated in bind. And
it was actually removed from bind.
Yeah, I think. Well, I believe so. Yeah, I think it's deprecated with extreme prejudice. It's commented out, but I think maybe some code still there. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just suggesting that maybe instead of updating the draft, we can just put it to the trash bin and forget about it, because the protocol is complex enough, and we don't need more complexity. We need less complexity.
All right, I agree with that. But so it was the other question on SIG0, or there were people using SIG0 in connection with, child parent synchronization and stuff like that. SIG0 is in use currently.
Yeah, the SIG0 that I can see use case for SIG0, even though there are like 3 implementations on the planet. One of them is bind, the other one is yours, and the third is Hickory DNS, and no one is using that. So. Well, yeah, but we can update that because there is at least clear use case for SIG0.
I would argue that if anybody needs to use SIG0 a lot or something, more than some amount, then in some cases TSIG is merely an optimization of that, where you get to do more efficient message authentication codes rather than having to do less efficient, higher overhead public key operations.
Fair.
So
okay,
if you like SIG0 and you're using it a lot, I think you might want to consider TSIG.
Yeah,
understood. And T-key authenticated by SIG0 to bootstrap yourself to
yeah,
TSIG.
sure. Yeah. Okay, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Johan?
I don't think anyone is surprised if I say that I'm in favor of keeping some sort of mechanism for asymmetric signing of DNS messages. Whether it's SIG0, a new record type, which is nicer and shinier in some way, is a detail to me. The important thing is to keep something that allows me to do asymmetric crypto across messages, not only RR sets. So I'm happy with your update. Whether we need a new record or not is sort of a larger discussion.
Okay.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you, Donald. Last presentation for today is Nick. So the last meeting, there was quite some enthusiasm for this draft, of this ID, and now there's a draft. There you go. Give a click.
All right, I don't want to keep everybody from their dinner here, so I'll probably go pretty quickly. So let's stop using DNS64 for NAT64 prefix discovery. This came out of a couple of discussions at the last DNSOP meeting in Vancouver and a couple of side conversations that we had. What we're talking about here is essentially the use of DNS64 for ascertaining the prefix used for network address translation in a NAT64 environment. Operationally, what does that mean? It means more dependency on DNS. We have to use DNS to get things like activated CLAT, to know what the network, to know that the network is IPv6 only, to figure out what we're going to use for translating from v4 to v6 from a prefix perspective. And you may be noticing that there's some caveats there, or some asterisks there because there's caveats, and that leads to, hey, there's a better way to do this. We have RFC 8781, gives us Pref64. It's a standard deployable, supportable mechanism for doing these things. It arguably makes things a little bit more simple because it takes DNS out of the equation for that. And it allows, from an operational perspective, as someone that's doing IPv6 only networks, it's significantly easier to support because I don't have to run DNS64 systems. So Pref64, like I said, solves a number of problems, simplifies the reliance, and removes DNS from the equation, and it lets us run without that within our network in a v6 only environment. So we're not saying 7050 needs to completely, explode, go away, whatever, disappear, because we know there's a long tail of transition from one to another. It's done a great job of helping us do IPv6 only networks. What we're saying is we've got a much more supportable, but we think better way in using Pref64. So let's start promoting that as the way to do it. And if you need more convincing, here's just a quick bulleted list of some existing issues with 7050. Dependency on network provided recursive resolvers, sorry. It introduces a little bit of network stack delay. It's not very flexible. And it's got some vaguely defined definitions of secure channel, which are difficult to implement at best. So, like I said, we're proposing a recommendation of Pref64 with a fallback to RFC 7050 as a may. And we think that this will solve some operational problems and make some people a little bit happier that don't want to deal with DNS64. This is just an example of how we wrote it. You can read the draft if you want to, if you haven't already. We think it's pretty clear what we're trying to do in there. And so my questions for the group, are there any reasons not to do this? And depending on those answers, what are the next steps here?
Okay, thank you, Nick. There are questions. Jen.
Jen Linkova. Right now, like 5 minutes ago, I realized we have more reasons to do this because we were discussing how 7050 would work in multi-homing scenario, especially if the different prefixes are used. And it's going to be a nightmare and you're never going to make it work at all, right? So it's actually kind of dangerous if you start thinking about multi-homing. I know we've been ignoring that problem for a while, like multi-homing in v6 doesn't exist. But I think it's time to start doing something about that. So yeah, well, I know it's normal for Corsair to support the adoption, but yes, I would love to see it adopted.
Thank you. Lorenzo?
Lorenzo Colletti, I do want to do this. I would love to delete the code, actually. But I think, have you asked the mobile network operators why they keep doing this? I think it might be some variant of like, oh, the RA comes from 3GPP equipment. If we can't easily configure it, we use the DNS64 for load balancing, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I don't know how realistic this is. Maybe in greenfield networks, yes, but.
Well, so as as I've done multiple v6 only deployments in brownfield, I've never done a greenfield one. Actually, it's always been a conversion. I I do find that Pref 64 is significantly easier. Perhaps if we make some revisions and refinements that say, you know, non-mobile environments, right? Because I do see that, you know, there's value there in the load balancing and things like that. But, you know, from a non-mobile perspective, this does actually make things a little bit easier. Pref 64 makes things significantly easier.
Thank you. Yeah, Tommy.
Tommy Jensen, Microsoft. I was just saying what I said on the chat, which is I will not be updating the secure channel document that I presented last time because this is the correct answer based on the 120 feedback, much simpler and setting us up for long-term success, centralizing on 8781.
Eric Vink and no specific cat here. Yeah, good idea. I like the fact that you keep the existing mechanism. You simply kind of put it below everything.
Yeah.
So it's kind of backward compatible.
Yeah, as written, it says, you know, you should use Pref 64. You may use RFC 7050. Again, it's not trying to completely remove it because that's just unrealistic, right?
And who knows? Okay, thank you. Adoption, please.
Thank you. You're doing well regarding time. So if there are no other questions, thank you. Or Lorenzo, you want to say something?
I just said talk to mobile operators. I don't suggest that we should like exempt them. I do think this is better. But maybe you can convince them to move off of their stuff.
Okay, thanks, everyone.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, for your question, sorry, before closing. Yeah, working group adoption. So we can discuss that, but we do that. We take that always to the mailing list.
Okay.
So
yeah,
yeah,
I think
so
that would
we
be.
will-
I would formally request this.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So that brings us to the end of the agenda for today. Please don't forget we have another slot Thursday afternoon, 12:30. But until then, the other thing to keep in mind is that this week is a really good time to sit down with your colleagues and work on a draft or tell people you shouldn't be working on a draft. Also, Benno and I are here all week if you have anything on your mind. Just, we should be easy to find and happy to talk at any time. So have a good week and we'll see everybody Thursday. Thank you.